Hi everyone. So I posted a video several months ago now about rebinding my leftover Hobonichi notebooks into new notebooks where I've reoriented the pages so that I can write in them. So just to illustrate, I bound this notebook out of one of these 2022 A5 day frees. So this is what the notebook looks like, and so you can see some of the pages do still have content on them. And so what I like to do, and you can see, so the journaling space, depending on how you do it, is this big on some pages, and you can decorate in the sidebar. I usually put the date here or put some washi tape or something. Not always, because it does get kind of chunky, but of course there are some empty pages in here, so it just depends on what page you're looking at as to what the layout is. But basically I bought one of these day frees and I decided I didn't like the size. I tend to prefer an A6 journal size. So typically I buy these A6 Hobonichi notebooks. So you can see the one I bound is almost the same dimensions. So typically I buy these, but if I have the opportunity to salvage paper from other Hobonichis for whatever reason, I will absolutely do that. So just to illustrate, these notebooks I rebound from, I had two Cousin Avec books from 2022, and I decided I didn't like the format. I was using these though as a planner, and I was trying to use this as a journal. So anyway, long story, still trying to find my planner piece. But anyway, so I rebound all of these into, so this started out as 2 of these, and I ended up with 4 notebooks this size. And so for these, you can see all the pages are mixed up, and so on a page like this, I would probably do a collage, and I intentionally scattered these kinds of pages throughout these notebooks. So sometimes you'll run into pages like this, and I'll do a collage or I'll do something to cover it, and I did that on purpose. You don't have to include all of these pages when you bind these notebooks, but I like to include them because I can do things on them. And I even left the month tabs from when I had set up the book, and I've got stickers. And so each of these notebooks has exposed binding, and all the pages are different. Some of them I've left text on. I did take out most of the pages that had writing on them, so these are mostly blank pages. But as you can see, I've got 4 of these, and I can absolutely journal on these pages, and I can and I have. So if you're wondering, it totally works as a little journal. And here's the last one. So they're all pretty much the same. I mixed up the pages. They're not in any order. I find that because the pages have the dates on the side here, it doesn't bother me as much. Like if I had left this in its original format and tried to journal on it, I think I would feel obligated. I know a lot of people have trouble with dated pages because they feel obligated to write or not write, or you feel bad if you've skipped a day or something. When I've done it this way, because the pages are all mixed up, it makes it a lot easier for me to ignore those dates. And I can always just put like a sticker or something over top of that if I need to. So anyway, so I got 4 of these from 2 of these. And this is from a 2022 day free as well. It's a chunky boy. This is pretty much the thickness of a Hobonichi Techo A6 version. And so this one I rebound as well, but this came from a day free purely because I just don't like this size of day free. It's not my thing. So I actually bought this on sale from JetPens. It was on last chance because it's a 2022. And I did notice that the 2023 books have gone up in price, as everything has. So anyway, this was $22 for 2022. Lots of 2s. So just really quickly, I'm going to show you what these look like when they're new. Just like this. So there's no dates or anything. They do have the sayings at the bottom and the little graphics. But this is what all the pages look like. So these are actually really nice to bind. And so what you'll end up with is a book that has, depending on how you do it, it'll have the sayings on both sides, or you'll just have a totally empty graph page. Just depends on the order of the pages. So you can see this one has less space to write, and this one has more. And this is just the next page. So it just depends on how you put them together. So yeah, I actually, I use other planners. I don't use these for planning. I just use these for journals. So it doesn't bother me that I'm sacrificing a book that is still in date. Doesn't bother me at all. So what I'm going to do is show everybody how I convert these from A5 notebooks to these little A6 notebooks. And the value of this is if you have an old Hobonichi or any old notebook that you've partially used and you want to save the paper, because like in this case, it's old Tomoe River paper, so it's the good stuff. I like to save all of those that I can, no matter if it has grid or not on it, because it's going to become harder to find. So you can do this with any Hobonichi, but you can do it with any notebook as well. As long as it has this kind of taped binding, this will make it a lot easier. If it's like a hardcover book, you may have trouble. The other thing I've been thinking about doing is I bought this 2023 weeks, and I'm going to try and use it for actual planning, but I was looking at it and I think it would be really easy to remove the cover from the text block and then actually bind these pages this way. So this book would be a book that was basically this size, and the binding would be here. And you could get 2 books out of that pretty easily. But I think in this case, well, you could probably write on the dated pages too. Not sure. But anyway, if I decided I didn't want to use this, you could make a little book like this big out of these pages. So that might be fun to try at some point as well. But I'm actually going to use that weeks. Okay, so the first step in this process is to remove the binding. And you want to remove it as close as you can to this edge, because it will give you more paper space, more space to write on. So I'm going to use a guillotine to do that, but you could also use an X-Acto knife and a metal ruler and just very patiently cut until you've removed the spine from all the pages. So I'm going to go do that now on my guillotine, and I will come back to you when that is done. Okay, so this is the spine of my book that I've removed. So I just took the book over to my guillotine and sliced it right along the spine edge. I only sliced off maybe 1/8 of an inch, if that, maybe 2 millimeters. So this is what my book looks like now. I've got the cover, end papers. Now your end papers will be glued to the first sheet. That's okay. You can just take them off. This will get trimmed, so you don't really need to worry too much about it, but it's pretty easy to come off. And so then I've got the rest of my pages loose. And on the back, you'll have the same thing. You'll have a cover sheet, cover paper, and end sheet, and your last page will be glued to it. Again, you can just pull that off. It comes off very easily. Now at this point, you would want to go through these pages and pull out anything that you don't want to use. Anything that's got writing on it, anything from these back pages. If you're not like me, if you don't want to collage on your pages, you just want to take all this out. Anything you feel like you wouldn't be able to journal on. So I probably would leave this page with the graph paper, but I would potentially take these out if I didn't want to collage. And on the front half, or the front of the book, so it really just depends on if you feel like you could write on a page or not. So if you feel like, if you look at this page and you fold it in half and you feel like I would struggle to write on this, or I would struggle to write on this, just take it out, it doesn't matter. So I'm gonna leave just a few of these pages in this book for collage. I'll mix them into the middle, but I'm not gonna leave as many as I had before. So I'm gonna take out these 5 back pages. I might keep them and do something else with them, we'll see. Okay, so the other thing is make sure you save this stuff because this is what you use to make the cover of your book. So just to show you for reference, here's the book that I made before. This is the cover that has been reoriented. This is this flyleaf or end sheet paper. That's what this is made of. And then you go into the book. And so on the back, you've got the same. You've got the end sheet, which is this one. And then you've got your back cover. And so the way that these are assembled is you bind the book with the end sheet, and I'll show you how to do this. You bind the book with the end sheet on top, and then you laminate the cover on at the end. So anyway, the next step in this process is to fold our paper. Now, this is a little bit tedious. The way that I like to do this is fold the pages sheet by sheet because it gives you the most consistent sizing, and it also will help us in the next step when we put the holes into the paper. I actually do that with a hacksaw instead of poking the hole. So you might have seen other people doing tutorials. They'll use an awl like this to poke the holes in their paper. I actually do it a much more efficient, different way that ensures that all of your sewing lines are straight like this. So I'll show you how to do that. So to fold your papers, I like to just put them in a stack next to me. And I'll clear off my workspace before I really get into this, but make sure that all of your papers have the rounded corners oriented in the same direction. It just helps you with your book's consistency. So to fold your paper, just grab a sheet, fold it in half, make sure your edges are lined up perfectly, and then take a bone folder. I'm sure we have seen these before in school. Take a bone folder and fold down the edge and set the paper aside. So again, don't worry about these pages that have the glue torn edge because we're going to trim that off later. So I'm going to get on with folding these papers, and I will catch up with you when I'm done with that. So here we are. Here are all my pages. So when the book is bound, it'll be about this thick. So I've got both of my end papers folded in here. And I've got these first few printed pages. What I'm gonna do, I'll leave them there for now, but when I'm ready to actually sew the book together, I'll probably intersperse those because I found that when I'm writing on these like day after day after day that it starts to get kind of annoying. And so I prefer to just mix them in. So it's just 1 or 4 total pages that I have to at some point deal with. But I would rather use them than not because they're pretty much writable. So I'll mix those in. Okay, so I've just zoomed this out a bit so you can see what I'm doing a bit better. The next step is to cut our holes in. And the idea is that you take the folded side of all the pages and you squeeze them between something so they're very, very tight. And then you use a little saw like this to cut the holes in. It makes all of your holes perfectly laid out. There's never any chance that your book is going to be doing this kind of thing as you sew. I just really like the consistency and clean lines. So I'm going to show you the alternative way to do this, or the I don't have all the equipment way to do this first. So you're going to make sure that all your pages are lined up as best you can on the folded edge. And so you might need to do this a few times to get everything as straight as you can, I mean, within reason. So that's pretty good. What I'm actually going to do is put binder clips on the fold side and see how, well, if you don't ruin your pages in the process, and see how tightly that squeezes the book together. That's exactly what you want. So for now, I'm just going to put 2 of these on so you can see the process. And it takes a little bit of adjustment. And I'd probably put a third one in the middle here. Okay, so this is one way to do this, and you would need to mark your holes. And so for me, I have drawn a template for A5 size, but I can also use this for A6 size. And so what I'll do typically is I'm gonna do kettle stitch on this book, so easier for you to see. Kettle stitch, it takes an odd number of holes. So I would need to put a hole here, and a hole here, and here and here. So what I would do is mark these on my paper and then move the clips around to access those lines as needed. That's the harder way to do it, I will admit, but it does work. The other thing that you can do, that you might find easier, is to clip your pages between something like two stiff rulers, like metal rulers. So you would want to line them up just barely sticking out from each ruler edge. And then you would need some bigger binder clips for this, but it's the same idea. Put binder clips here and binder clip here, mark out your lines, and then you can saw your holes. This is the same concept as what I'm gonna be doing with my book press. So this is the easiest way I think to do it. So once you get your clips on, this is what, well, it should be straight, but this is what your book would look like between the clips. That's pretty darn good. So this is definitely the cheap, easy way to do this. So I'm actually going to use my book press for this because I have one and I would like to use it. So again, I'm just gonna make sure all my papers are lined up as best I can. And this is my working edge, so I'm actually going to stick these in here as best I can. Give it a little squeeze, and then what I like to do is just take something like a pencil, or my bone folder would work. I can use that too, to help me sort of get these pages totally lined up as well as I can. Now I'm gonna give this a little, I'm gonna loosely tighten. Then I'm gonna flip it up and push these pages out about 1/4 of an inch. Make sure they're all lined up, and then I'm gonna tighten this the rest of the way. Okay, so now I'm gonna show you how I like to mark my holes. So again, this is my A5 template. I'm actually just gonna use this to find the center, and I'm gonna mark it with a pencil. And then I'm gonna, that's all I need that for. You could eyeball that for sure, or use a ruler. And then I'm gonna take one of these rulers I'll use in a second. So now what I'm gonna do is mark in from the edge 1/2 inch on both sides. So now I've got 3 holes marked. I've got 1/2 inch in, 1/2 inch in, and the center. Now all I need to do is the halfway point between these two and the halfway point between these two. I'm gonna do that. And these don't really need to be perfect. Just close is fine. All right, so you can see I've got 5 holes marked. Again, I'm doing kettle stitch, and kettle stitch needs an odd number of holes. So now what I'm gonna do, I will do my best to show you how this works. It's a little awkward, so bear with me. I'm gonna take my hacksaw and I'm gonna cut lines into the spine of my book on the marks that I've made. So typically I'll do 3 or 4 passes in one direction, and then I'll flip everything around and do the other direction. It seems to be more consistent that way. Because no matter how much you try, this is going to be arced a little bit. And so you kind of focus on one side and flip it and focus on the other. You don't have to make super deep cuts here, no more than 1 millimeter. I mean, it's not going to hurt if you go deeper than 1 millimeter, but you don't need to go deeper than 1 millimeter. And the deeper your holes are, the more glue you're going to get between your pages, and so you want to be a little careful. Okay, so let's see if we can get a close-up shot there. And so you can see those cuts are really very shallow. And that's all you need, because each page is stacked individually. You just need to make sure that each page makes contact with the saw. And because they're stacked individually, that's a very shallow cut. That's why I do them individually. If you were to stack, say, 8 pages together and then put those signatures in your press to cut them, you would have to cut those holes deeper in order to get cuts through every single piece of paper in that signature. You don't really have to know what that means, just understand that it's better to stack them individually and then cut your holes in. All right, so I'm gonna get this out of the press now. We're done with this part. And in case you're interested, this press is from Bird Bob on Etsy. Very friendly folks. They make great quality products and very affordable. So if you're looking for a finishing press like this, I would recommend Bird Bob for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna pull out my papers. And now we're gonna start assembling our book. So I need 1 end paper, that's for sure. And this one is gonna go on the bottom. Now what I'm gonna do is take my stack of funky papers with lines on them. That should be good. And what I'm gonna do is just make sure that a couple of these make it into each signature of the book. I'll probably have somewhere between 10 to 12 signatures in this book, so 2 of these per signature should be fine. So I'm just gonna put those in a separate stack. I'm gonna take one of these. Basically, I'm gonna assemble my signature. So a signature is a group of pages that make up a book. And I'm gonna literally just start sticking pages in. Keep in mind, they're all in the same orientation so that the curved edge is always together. And I'm gonna put 8 pages per signature because I know that's how I like to use my Tomoe paper. So that's 8 pages, 2 of which are this funky paper. I'm gonna set that aside. And it's okay if your signatures don't have the perfect number. It's okay if you get your signatures reversed so that the corners aren't in the right place. It doesn't really matter. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and finish putting these together. I'm gonna turn off the camera for now. I'll come back to you when I've got all this done. Okay, so here is my finished, somewhat assembled book. So I've got all my signatures together. I've put 8 pieces of paper in each signature, so 8 folded pieces of paper make 1 signature. And I've got my end sheets here ready to go. So these are, remember, the end papers from the Hobonichi. That is what these have become. And so I've got 1 end paper on the top, 1 end paper on the bottom, and then I'm gonna start sewing. And just for your reference, I have 13 signatures total. So I'm gonna be binding this together using kettle stitch. I'm not gonna give you a tutorial on kettle stitch because there are dozens already on YouTube that are far better than mine. I'm gonna link to the one that I like the best in the description. So if you would like to learn how to do kettle stitch, please just follow that tutorial and come back here when you're done so we can finish our books together by putting the covers on and trimming them. Okay, so here we are. I've got my finished sewn book. This is the front of my book. I've got the Hobonichi stamp, which I like to put in the front. And you can see how my stitches are nice and straight for the most part. And tapping the book on the table like this just aligns all your signatures really nicely. So the next step is to glue. So you're gonna need your rulers and clips again, or clamps, or in my case, I'll use my finishing press. Again, you're going to put something stiff and metal on either side of your spine. This might take a little bit of work. It's easiest to put the spine on the table and put your metal pieces on either side like this, so everything is sure to be perfectly aligned. Like this, and then you probably need someone to help you do this, be my guess. Put bigger clips than I have on either side of your rig, so it looks sort of like this, but do them in line. Like I said, you might need help or bigger clips. So get your book spine clipped between some metal bits like this. I'm going to do this in my book press because that's why I have one. If you do end up using a book press, I put plastic packing tape or clear packing tape on my glue edge, and then you can just change it out when it gets super dirty. I do this because this way the extra glue that gets on here doesn't permanently stick to the wood. Okay, and it helps to get it in the center. Even though these are pretty sturdy pieces of wood, they do also bend a tiny bit, which is why the book I showed you at the beginning has a little bit of a warp on the spine. It doesn't really bother me, but it will be permanent when you glue your book, so just be aware. If your metal is more flexible, you might need to use like 2 pieces of metal or something else. So I'm just tightening this up now as tight as I can get it. Tight, tight, tight. I want this to be super tight. And the reason that we do this super tight is so that, see how nice and compressed the spine is? This will be the actual thickness of the book. After I glue it, it will stay here. This also keeps the glue from seeping too far between each signature. If you don't compress it like this, glue can get between your signatures, and then when you open your book, the glue rips the paper. That's why this step of the compression is really important. So you can see my pages are lined up perfectly with the wood, nice and compressed. I'm gonna grab my glue and glue brush and I will be right back. Okay, so I'm ready to glue my spine. In my little tub here, I don't have any camera room. I have PVA glue. The PVA glue is this brand, and it's neutral pH adhesive. I do recommend that you buy the special bookbinding glue because other glues may have acids or chemicals that discolor your paper over time, or they may break down. So you could theoretically use Elmer's glue, but I think Elmer's glue will probably break down over time. Just depends on how durable you want your book to be. Just remember, this spine is going to be exposed, so you definitely don't want to use anything with that dries a weird color, unless you want it to be a weird color, in which case go for it. So what I'm going to do is just put some glue on the spine here. And this is just a cheap brush we had sitting around. You can use any inexpensive brush you can get at the art store or at probably the grocery store or Target or whatever. And you don't need to scrub the glue in. In fact, it's better if you don't scrub it in. If you scrub in your glue, it again will get stuck between the pages of your book. And so I'm just very lightly applying the glue here. And that's all we need for the first coat. Don't worry about glue. If you use the packing tape method, don't worry about getting the glue on the outside. It'll just peel right off. So now I'm gonna let this dry for about an hour. It doesn't need to be a super long time. I'm gonna come back and put another coat of glue on this, so I'll show you that in a few minutes. Okay, so here we are back again. I'm just gonna do layer 2. This isn't even totally dry, but it doesn't have to be. Anyway, I'm gonna let this dry for another hour or so, then I'll be back for the final steps. Okay, so the next step we need to do is cut one of these cover pieces in half, and one will be the front and one will be the back. So what we need to do is find perfect middle. But there's a trick to that, which is to take one of your scrap pieces that you didn't use for your book and fold your scrap paper in half. Like so. Open it up, and voila, you have middle. I'm just going to mark it with a pencil. Because it just makes things easier. Okay, you can cut it with, I would recommend an X-Acto, or I'm using a rotary tool. Okay, so there's our two halves, front and back. All right, so we are ready to assemble our covers on our book. Okay, here we go. I've got my spine glued and dried. Yep, it's good to go. It's not cured, but that's okay. We're gonna cure the whole thing overnight. So it's fine the way that it is. Okay, so getting this out of whatever you've got it in can sometimes be a little bit tricky. I usually try to, it's not so tricky if you're using like the metal rulers and stuff, but you just want to be gentle not to tear the glue on the actual spine. And it's okay if you have little dangly bits. We'll deal with those later. Okay. So here's our book. Now, I don't know if you can see, maybe I have little extra glue stuff here. I'm actually just going to take a pair of scissors and very carefully just cut that stuff off. This doesn't have to be perfect because you won't even notice it once you got the covers glued on. That's pretty good though. Okay, so this is our text block all ready for the covers. So all we're gonna do is laminate the covers. I have a big stack of scrap paper here. Actually I'll use this one, it works just fine. So I'm gonna put a piece of scrap paper under here so that I don't get any glue anywhere I don't want it. Sometimes it's better to be light with the glue, usually if your cover has a tendency to warp, but I know that these covers won't warp. Okay, I'm going to take my front piece and line it up very carefully on the edge of the spine. If you're gonna have some kind of misalignment, it's better for it to hang over the spine rather than not be close enough to the spine. Okay, now I'm gonna take this paper out, I don't need it. And I'm gonna do a little flip. So I don't know if you can see there are some bubbles here. I'm just gonna take my bone folder and make sure that this whole piece is very well adhered. Okay, so you can see there's no more bubbles, everything is super smooth, that's what we want. Now, the moisture from this sometimes can seep through and can cause a little bit of warping on your paper. So I like to put probably 6 or so sheets of paper there, just to prevent that warping. I'm also going to put in just a little bit of wax paper. Just to help. And I'm gonna glue the back the same way I did the front. Gonna take our other cover piece. Okay. Looks good. And gonna flip it over. Same thing here. I'm gonna, sorry for the shadows. I'm gonna use my bone folder just to make sure there aren't any little air bubbles. That looks good. And I'm gonna put several pieces of scrap paper in here, as well as wax paper. Okay, so we are almost done. The second to last step is we want this to cure overnight, and we want it to cure extremely flat. So what I'm gonna do is just put this on my desk, and I'm going to put a stack of heavy books on top of it, and I'm gonna let it sit overnight. And then tomorrow we will trim the edges and we will be done. So I'll see you back here tomorrow. Well, good morning. So my book has dried overnight under something heavy. And so this is what the spine looks like now. And I don't know if you can see, but it's been glued all on the spine. And here's the front and back covers. And papers. And here are the pages. So at this point, you could just stop. That's totally fine, because the trimming step can be a little bit tricky because just the book is so thick. But anyway, at this point, I personally would want to trim these edges just a tiny bit to make sure they're nice and sharp. It really makes the book look finished and polished. So as before, if you don't have a guillotine, I assume almost all of you don't, you would want to use a metal ruler and just hold your ruler nice and tight on top of the book and do multiple passes with your X-Acto or box cutter or whatever until all of your pages are cut and they're all the same smoothness, because this step is kind of tricky because you can't always do that very neatly, especially with a book this thick. So I would just say be patient. Make sure that you hold your ruler on very tight where it should be. And one tip I do have for you is try to use a cutter like this where you can extend the blade, because on a book that's this thick, you need that thickness on your blade when you get down to the bottom of the book. Hope that makes sense. You need that thickness there, because if you're just using it, let's say like this, you're gonna run into this plastic part of the blade before you're done cutting. So I'm gonna go trim my book and I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so here we are. My final book is trimmed and ready to use. So I just barely trimmed any off the edges, as the least amount possible. Trimming is probably the hardest step. So if you're unsure about making sure that you can get these nice crisp edges, I would honestly probably just leave it, because you can potentially ruin your book at the trimming step. So if you're at all unsure, or if you don't want to waste your book, or maybe do a practice round on something else, but yeah, definitely trimming is the worst step. And if you feel like you are not confident with your cutter and ruler, understandably, honestly, I would just skip that step. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this little tutorial. I hope it was helpful. I hope that you can upcycle your old Hobonichis, save that good paper. If anybody has any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and I will see everybody later. Bye.